Hello, Module 8 is called Discovering the Satisfaction Factor. So satisfaction and pleasure are such an important part of eating, and yet it's something that has definitely been lost with years of dieting. I've worked with lots of clients over the years, and one of the familiar themes I see running through is this reluctance to actually eat for satisfaction. And what I mean by that is how many times when you go to eat or you go to choose something, if you're going out for a meal or if you're popping in somewhere to grab lunch, do you go for the healthy option, the way we're conditioned to go for the chicken salad or the tuna sandwich over the egg and bacon sandwich that you really fancy? So dieting culture, dieting mentality has really created like a blockage, if you like, when it comes to actually eating for nutrition, but also eating for satisfaction and pleasure. And it makes me think of a time last year I was working with a lady who was a prolific binge eater, and then restriction. She'd have days and days of overeating, thousands and thousands of calories, hundreds of thousands of calories, and then she would go into days of not eating. So that whole pendulum of starving and restriction and then binging, she was really ingrained in those patterns. And as I was working with her and we got talking and I was starting to understand her food relationship more deeply, something that kept coming up was how she would, if she was going out, her husband had quite a high powered job and they would quite often go for meals out in expensive restaurants, in hotels, and she would not eat all day to then give herself permission to eat what she wanted when they went out. But she would do that. She'd not eat all day. She'd go out really hungry, and then she'd get the menu, and then she would order a chicken salad or something like that. And then they would either go back to the hotel or she'd go home, where she'd then proceed to eat a couple of packs of biscuits. And another story she shared was she would go pop to Tesco's to grab something for lunch, and instead of going for the sandwich that she really wanted, she'd go for the healthy option. And again, she'd get home and then she'd eat chocolate, or she'd eat something that was really high in calories. And the more we sort of started to see these patterns unfolding, it was really obvious that she was not eating for satisfaction. So the two things you'll hear me say all the time is giving yourself permission to eat, but also eating for satisfaction. So last week in Module 7, you were invited to start to explore your fullness cues, and you were given some little techniques to try, like the eating with a non-dominant hand, and like the recognizing as you're nearing the end of eating, asking yourself some questions around how full you are. And these techniques take time to practice. So recognizing not only our hunger cues, but also our fullness cues are really important when we start to work on our food relationship. But equally, eating for pleasure and eating for satisfaction are so important if we want to break these cycles of sitting down and eating, not feeling fully satisfied, and then like raiding through the fridge or the cupboards trying to find something that's actually going to give us that satisfaction, that sense of satisfaction. So this switch training is all about that. And what we're going to cover off, we're going to start by looking at what is it you really want to eat. So there's a little exercise in there that's going to kind of get you starting to think about, when you get those hunger cues, to actually stop and think about what is it that you really want to eat from a satisfaction perspective. And what you've got to remember as well, there's going to be years and years of dieting rules in there, so we're kind of a bit conditioned to go for certain things. We get quite boring with our eating as well. And I get that, if you're busy, sometimes having that consistency and that routine is a good thing. But if the things you're turning to are not giving you a sense of satisfaction, you're really opening yourself up to pick later on, or to then go for things that do give you that sense of satisfaction. And satisfaction isn't just about taste, it's about how does it look, how does it smell, a lot of people like miss crunching if they're not eating certain foods. So that whole experience of eating and satisfaction is something that we're going to explore in this module. So the first thing you're going to have a chance to do is to look at what it is that you really want to eat. And there's a little exercise in there that's going to get you to kind of really slow down and recognize, when you recognize those hunger cues, to really start to ask some questions around what it is that you really want to be eating. What is it that's, is it something salty? Is it something sweet? You know, and actually start to give yourself something that is satisfying rather than what you're preconditioned to tell yourself that you have to have. We're then going to look at the importance of eating slowly. So this is the whole mindful side of eating. And I'm going to take you through an intuitive eating training practice. And I'm going to pop a separate voice note in the group in a separate post where I've done the written text to this in the written workbook. But sometimes trying to read through something at the same time of doing it can be quite hard. So I've done a little voiceover for you as well. So you can play that whilst you're going through the intuitive eating exercise. So some of you have done mindful eating with me before, but again, this is a practice. You know, if it's not something that you're practicing every day, then it's worth revisiting it, because all of these things that I'm teaching you over these modules, you don't just do them once and then forget about them. If you want your relationship with food to change, you've got to find ways to start implementing these little techniques on a day-by-day basis, which are going to help to get you honouring your and recognising your hunger, going to get you start to work through some of the dieting mentality stuff. It's going to get you recognising your fullness cues, slowing down while you're eating what you really fancy. And I know that when you start practicing these techniques, you've got all that historical stuff that it's going to be wagging its finger at you and feeling like it's wrong, giving yourself permission to eat and eating the foods that you want to eat. We have to work through that. We have to work through that resistance, because what's familiar to you guys is how you are used to eating and the food rules that you're used to following, and we're trying to unpick and unravel those and create new food rules. But the only way you can do that is by practicing these techniques. So the importance of eating slowly, and I'm going to take you through an intuitive eating exercise. We're then going to spend some time looking at your current eating environment. And that sort of is going to include, do you sit at the table? Do you sit in front of the TV? So the whole distraction kinds of things, and encouraging an eating environment that is satisfying as well. So it's not just about the food that we're eating, it is also about the environment. And an added part, the last thing that we're going to look at is the atmosphere, the emotional atmosphere that's around you when you're eating. So, you know, if you're eating on your own, when you sit down and eat, do you feel quite lonely because you're eating on your own? And how does that maybe influence how much you eat? If you're somebody who has got children and there tends to be a lot of energy or moaning about the foods, or whilst you're sat eating, if it's quite stressful, thinking about how that may then influence how you eat and your satisfaction levels. So we're going to kind of have a whole look about the whole atmosphere and environment in which your current eating patterns happen, and whether there's any links into how this influences how you eat and your satisfaction levels. Because when we can start eating for satisfaction and eating for pleasure, you will leave the table feeling physically full, nutritionally full, but also emotionally full. And when you feel emotionally satisfied from what you've eaten, you're less likely to then go into eating the other stuff outside of your eating. It's really interesting, because I know I've been to some really nice restaurants and you get a fairly small portion, but because it tastes beautiful and it's presented beautifully, you actually feel really full. And yet I know there's other times where I've eaten a really big plate of food and actually come away from it still feeling like I could eat, certainly half an hour later, because the whole satisfaction level wasn't there for me. And when we eat, we don't just eat for nutrition, we eat for satisfaction and pleasure. And if we're not giving ourselves the satisfaction and pleasure through the meals that we're eating, we're going to go and seek it in other ways. And of course, then we then label the snacking or the raiding the cupboards as something bad that we then feel bad about. So an interesting one this week, guys. Discovering your satisfaction factor. I look forward to hearing how you get on with this training this week. So any questions, let me know. And as always, pop your comments below this post.